for coming. Well, the Ontario government needs to climate-proof the province. We're now experiencing the climate alterations caused by the cumulative release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Higher temperatures, along with an increase in the frequency and severity of intense weather events such as ice storms, heavy rains, heat waves, droughts, and windstorms, are projected for Ontario. Research coordinated by the Applied Research and Development Branch of Ministry of Natural Resources is providing a much clearer sense of how this climate change is affecting Ontario now and how these impacts will intensify over the next 30 years and beyond. As temperatures increase across the province, warmer climate conditions will expand northward. Not all the indigenous plants and animals traditionally suited to cooler conditions may be capable of adapting to such change. While some species may thrive, others will not, and certain rare or endangered species may be lost altogether. The ecological repercussions and impacts on Ontario's biodiversity are expected to be significant and irreversible. Mitigation efforts that reduce the greenhouse gas releases constitute the first line of defense against these climate impacts. However, even if we do begin to show some success in that regard, and we haven't, significant damage has already been done. Historical emissions are already present in the atmosphere will continue to cause a slow and inexorable increase in global temperatures long into the future. Our current provincial and local infrastructure, programs, and services were not designed to address these climatic changes, nor the ecological disruptions they will produce. From emergency services to water management to forest firefighting, how will Ontario handle the growing heat and increasingly unpredictable weather patterns? Let me refer to some specific examples. How will our healthcare system cope with an expected increase in heat stress, summer asthma, and warm climate diseases such as Lyme disease and West Nile virus? How will our agricultural sector respond to a longer growing season, shifting precipitation patterns and droughts, and the influx of warm weather pests and weeds into Ontario? How will our energy sector meet the heavy demand for summer air conditioning or counter the threat of winter ice storms? How will our shipping and fisheries sectors cope with the expected 1 meter drop in the Great Lakes water levels? How will northern communities maintain winter ice roads and respond to losses of permafrost, changing hydrology, and the stresses to the boreal forest and wetlands? Emissions reductions notwithstanding, adaptation strategies must also be developed in order to prepare society, the economy, and the natural environment for the unavoidable changes that are coming. Adaptation cannot stop climate change from happening, but it can help contain the negative impacts. Now, last April, the Ministry of the Environment quietly released a response to the need for action on climate change adaptation. It was called Climate Ready, Ontario's Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan 2011 to 2014. It's an important document with major implications to the future of Ontario. And today I respond to the Ministry's strategy and plan with my own preliminary review. My report to the Legislature considers whether we really are ready for change or not. Since the release of Climate Ready, I have been encouraged to learn that progress has been made on a number of the action items identified within the strategy. The details regarding the implementation of specific climate-ready actions will be reviewed in future ECO reports. At this preliminary stage, however, I believe that the Climate Ready represents a relatively comprehensive adaptation strategy and could be a successful plan. However, there are some weaknesses. Climate Ready identifies decisive actions to address adaptation across Ontario, but it fails to clearly indicate how these will be prioritized for implementation over the 4-year time frame of the strategy. Now, the strategy correctly identifies that adaptation initiatives are required across the mandates of several government ministries, but it doesn't outline specific responsibilities for some key ministries like energy, economic development and innovation, or northern development and mines. The strategy contains few quantitative or qualitative targets or specific timelines for delivery. And the Ministry of Environment did not post this document, obviously significant environmental policy document, on the EBR registry as a proposal, as is required by law, thereby denying the public the right to comment on its suitability and its adequacy. My report lays out how I will evaluate the government's progress in implementing this adaptation plan over the coming months. In these times, funding adaptation initiatives will be clearly a challenge. Some actions can be achieved within the existing expenditure envelopes, and others will require new investments. But as the Stern Report economic analysis established, what we don't spend on adaptation now will cost us much more in the future. Now, for those of you that have lost copies from your bedstand, I do have a few copies of the government report over on the side there, and they can make people available to people. Do you have any questions?
Can you talk a bit about some of what you see as the potential economic impacts of climate change? What could it end up costing people?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a rough projecting from the Stern Report. In the government's report, they use the term, the figure $5.6 billion is a figure. That's a rough estimate based on, projections, but it is, a reasonable working figure. The point is, it's very expensive. You can spend a whole lot of money. It's a question of what the priorities are. We have an infrastructure built for a climate we no longer have. So how much of that infrastructure has to be rebuilt and replaced is really the question. Obviously, you can go all the way and spend many, many billions of dollars, but it's a matter of setting the priorities and addressing issues, and we're just starting to look at it.
A lot of people are going to be thinking about the weather today because it's going to be so warm, possibly record-breaking. What do you see in the larger term that you can tell people as they go out today and say, wow, fantastic, I love the fact that
Sure.
It's warm in March?
Well, let's make it, let's take a recent example in real human terms. As we've been watching, I think with some anxiety, the situation up in Attawapiskat this year with the people living in tents and having inadequate housing, and the government of Canada responding by, was it 23 mobile homes that were shipped up there. Those are shipped up to Moosonee to be moved by the winter road up to Attawapiskat. The only way to get those houses in, and those trailers sat in Moosonee for a long time waiting for the winter road. Fortunately, we got a good freeze in the middle of February, and they managed to get them up there. But we came this close to not having that winter road. And not only in this exceptional case of housing would have caused tremendous personal problems for the people living up there, but we also ship the fuels up to those communities along winter roads. If those winter roads fail to appear one year, it's a huge cost to society. We're into air freighting very expensive commodities up there.
Could you bring it to people in the GTA?
Sure. Well, I think in GTA, and we're counting on, as most people in GTA I think Toronto Hydro has done a pretty good job of maintaining the electrical system and operating in the last few years. But I think we all know we operate near the limit in the summer heat stress times. And if we have an exceptionally hot year, which we haven't had in the last few years, but we're always this far away, we overload the downtown system, and of course we have massive power outages. We have a lot of old equipment that goes faulty in hot weather, so you could lose the power in the economic core of the country. And we know how disruptive that is. Back in 2004, it was tremendous disruption. So that's one very practical aspect. Notwithstanding the health implications. I had occasion in my very own advisory committee that I meet with. I took them down to southwestern Ontario, looking at some things down in the Peely area a couple of years ago, and one of the members came down with Lyme's disease. I mean, it is a real impact on people's lives. Something we never had to face just a few years ago in Ontario.
What other pests and diseases are you? Oh, sorry.
No.
Go
ahead.
No, go ahead, too. Ladies first.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry if you've already mentioned it, but as we build endless condos with no windows, dependent on air conditioning, is the building code one of the areas that we can revisit? The
building code is actually identified. I'll give the government credit, and in their plan, I'd like to see a little bit more comprehensive action and a little bit shorter time frames, but nonetheless, they have identified the building code has to be revisited. But we're in the early stages. It's just a plan. But the specific about the question about what level of insulation and what kind of design in these condo buildings. Of course, it's too late for the 150 or so that are going up. But that's the kind of concern we have to build in, because if we have that problem, we're building infrastructure now that will plague us on energy demands going forward many decades, and we've got to get on top of that.
I was just going to ask, what new pests and disease, are there new pests or weeds or diseases that you
absolutely
can specify that we might be?
Well, the Lyme disease in West Nile, they may not be real new, but they're okay, they're here. Sure, kudzu. Kudzu, look it up. Kudzu is a Japanese vine that was introduced in the United States. When I first encountered it, I'm a plant ecologist by training, and I've been following it for decades, for professional reasons, but it was interested in the southern states, and it covers everything. It comes up in, it covers all the existing trees, the utility poles, the fire lines. It grows on and covers the whole landscape, a huge pest problem. And kudzu has been moving north with what we call the isotherms, the lines of warming temperature. It's in New York State now. It's just south of the border. Watch for kudzu. It's actually got it had one little spot introduction in Ontario, last year, the year before, and they were able to eradicate it, but it is pressing the borders.
And what does that do, though? Like,
Well,
aside from covering everything, does it choke out other
Chokes
plant life?
chokes out other vegetation, kills the trees, plagues your utility, your poles, get on your house and your outbuildings and everything. It's like a picture of a very, very aggressive vine that covers everything and displaces the local the fauna.
Are there things like, you're talking here about the government having to do things to get ready for some of these changes. Are there things like individual homeowners should be doing to prepare?
Well, I think, sure. Well, it's a matter of homeowners can make a contribution to the bigger thing if they're conscious of water use and these kind of things. So we're going to have, and we already have had in Southern Ontario drought problems in various areas. It's well known the areas that are prone to water constraints, Kitchener, Guelph area, some in the southwest when you get into a drought period. Changing our water use patterns, more conservation, rain barrels, those kinds of things. That's a major benefit to the strains that will be put on municipal water supplies. I think people have to be conscious of, in a very practical sense, what are they planting in their gardens? What kinds of species are they bringing in? Because things that at one time were quite benign and now are poised to cause disruptions and things. So there's all sorts of local things, and they're along the lines of the traditional advice in terms of conservation.
You mentioned that land use policies are something you want to continue watching moving forward. Is that could that touch on anything like the places to grow?
Sure, and that's exactly the thing. The places to grow. I mean, you can do it at be concerned at different levels. On a large scale, we're under constraints. I mean, obviously, increasing the density. Some of the things the places to grow was designed to do will be a benefit in these situations, but there are other considerations, and certainly in the design and of buildings and the energy efficiency and the nature of air conditioning loads and the sprawl aspect has, to the extent we allow it, has implications on the infrastructure serving it and the magnitude of the exposure of that infrastructure to extreme weather events.
In brief terms, can you say where the government's strategy falls short?
Well, as I indicated in the remarks, basically, it's not often I get to come up here and say that basically it's a good plan, but which I'm essentially saying this time. But prioritization is a big issue, especially with respect to the financial constraints they're under in these situations. Obviously, we don't have the money to go at this full scale. So, what are the priorities going to be? And that discussion has not been had. Associated with that, specific timelines and targets. It's difficult for governments these days to meet their plans unless we know, unless they set targets and timelines, and something we can hold them accountable. Absolutely. Those are, and then in the business about them not posting on the EBR, what that means is they didn't bring the public of Ontario inside into the discussion. So, it's hard to sort of force implementation of things if the public isn't comfortable with it, they don't understand it, why you're doing it and such. If there is going to be expenditures and things that are associated with this, which there inevitably will be, you have a chance of bringing the public to understand and accept the expenditures if you've involved them in the plan, and they haven't done that in this thing.
What do you advocate for bringing in the revenue to?
Well, fortunately for the Environment Commission, it's not my plan, my problem. I mean, it's a matter the government has to sit down with the revenue it has, the resource it has. But certainly, there's no point in building a bridge that's at threat of being washed out. There's no point in building hydroelectric infrastructure that is at high risk of being wiped out in an ice storm. So there are some very practical considerations. It's not a matter of it's just how you have to amend things. There's something called the frequency and severity of storms. There's something called the IDF curves, the intensity, duration, and frequency curves of hydrology. They have to be changed. We build to those. Just the old ones are no good because we don't have that climate anymore. So there is really no choice. I mean, we have a constrained society financially. I'm not talking about expanding to a new program here. I'm talking about doing something within the reality we have to cope with.
So you're not advocating for carbon pricing?
Not in this report. That's just reviewing their adaptation plan. Yes, I have generally talked about carbon pricing and the mitigation side.
You say you expect to see a firm direction given to planning authorities.
Yes.
What are some of those directions you would like to see at the municipal level?
Well, water usage would be a firm, absolutely, how we handle municipal water usage and how we handle gray water. These are kind of things that are going to be harsh realities. Aspects in terms of road construction and road layout will be changed as a result of this. So it's a complex issue because you've got to look at it in the full breadth of all the implications. But and then of course the building of the house, the structures themselves. You know what was referred to with the glass towers. I mean, you know, what are the installation standards? What are the building patterns and design? One thing they've already done is they have these. Just to give you an example, they've already done this what they call hurricane clips, which is because of the risk of severe storms, and you know when they construct a building, you have to, you know, you've seen in the States some of the older buildings with the roofs torn off and such things, and when not only the buildings get torn apart, those things become projectiles in high wind events. So we now required to build, or will be requiring to build our homes in Ontario in a manner similar to they have to build them into the hurricane and tornado prone zones in the States. So we're starting to adopt those kind of building codes, that structure, that sort of thing.
So we should pretty much count on you know what we saw with those tornadoes in Indiana.
They were pretty close, weren't they?
Right, it's getting pretty close.
Yeah, they're pretty close. And you recall that you know the big tornado zones tended to be further south. You know, 20, 30 years ago. For those of remember that. But we're seeing a shift in all the climate patterns right now.
And what does it mean to see like tornadoes like we saw in Indiana in March? That's the stuff that you used to see, like you said, way down south in
yeah,
summer.
and I think the key message you see is that we don't call it climate same, we call it climate change, because it's different, and it's not always. We know that it's going to be different from historical patterns. We had decades of relatively consistent, notwithstanding occasional major event. We had relatively consistent and predictable patterns of weather based on the climates that exist in North America, and we're already seeing that. Those have all changed. We've seen the pattern radically, and so we're going to see more change. And it's hard to predict specific storm patterns and such, but we know they're shifting.
So weather like we see today, which is beautiful and we all love it.
Yep.
It should actually scare us.
Well, it should, because it becomes, people don't realize how dependent or how we've built our society on the expectation of a certain pattern of weather. And now that pattern of weather thing, and there's some practical economic stuff, very simple, straightforward. Snow in Collingwood, if the snow does already. When I was a kid, they played hockey in outdoor rinks in Toronto, without refrigeration, in the ice surface. And we don't do much of that anymore in Toronto. And as the shifting patterns go, our society is built, and it comes to expect a certain range of weather conditions that we call climate. And the climate has changed already, and that means our economy may adjust. Look all the way up on the biodiversity side. We've heard about the polar bears up in the Hudson Bay coast of Ontario being, it's been widely reported that they're in trouble. Interesting new research that's out there. The problem, of course, is the ice doesn't come in. There's a lot of open water. The polar bears can't get on the ice to hunt seals. What's coming into the open water? We have reports now that orcas, killer whales, have been active on that coast. They eat seals too. So now you get a restructuring of the ecosystem, a change in the biological system where the polar bears are under double threat. They can't get on the ice, and now they have a major competitor.
So when are we going to have a shrimp fishery in Lake Ontario?
I assure you that given the freshwater condition of Lake Ontario, that will never occur.
I just want to ask you sort of a variation of the question I asked before. I mean, and Mr. Ferguson pointed out, today is a day that people are
That's right.
going to be celebrating the weather.
I'd like to take credit for that, but I won't.
But you would like to, so you pardon me mixing metaphors, rain on the parade a little bit and say, what?
Yeah, we say we have built our society on a climate that we no longer have. And the climate is different now than it was, and it is going to continue to change. That means that erratic weather, risks to our bridges and roads, Risks to our electrical system are all new realities with life. So that's the message. We've built for our whole structure on a climate we no longer have. That's it. And I think so. Although will there be some positive outputs? Some increase in growing season. Most farmers are saying, yeah, I could use that, right? And unusual weather in the spring. But what does unusual weather in the spring mean? If we got more weather like this, 14 degrees, they're forecasting for Toronto, we're going to get the buds breaking on the plants and such. What does it mean if we get a freeze? The freeze is expected later this week. So there are disruptions inherent. The fact that everything, the biodiversity and certainly our economic systems and our society adjust to a climate we no longer have.
What about culture? I mean, you talked about outdoor hockey. I mean, sense of identity, sense of what it means.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and it's part of it, and we're, true. I don't have a lot of comment on that, but that is, we define ourselves already on the hockey rink. On the back of our $5 bill is kids playing shinny hockey on a outdoor rink, right? And I'm not sure you can do that even up in North Bay where I live anymore.
How much of this is a Toronto thing? Because I know we've had a really mild winter, but my colleague just got back from Ottawa last weekend and said it was freezing and there was way too much snow. So,
yeah,
we're in a little bubble here.
True, but if you look at the Ottawa situation, they didn't get their rink in for the full festival time that they enjoy and things. So I mean, they have had a mild winter too. They had periodically they were up. I was up that way myself, and it was cold, but that was a short-lived thing.
We've all heard about polar bears, but you're talking about biodiversity being at risk. What are some other species that?
Well, the one that we haven't, the big scary one that's coming is the mountain pine beetle, which has jumped out of British Columbia. It's well established in Alberta. It's in the Jack Pine and it's moving east. And we don't know exactly how fast it'll get here, but we know it's devastating for us as it goes. So that's the big scary one that's coming because a lot of our forest industry in the north depends on Jack Pine, and when it reaches across the prairies into northwestern Ontario, that'll be economic.
That we
animals.
Other than polar bears, like other animals or
yeah, there's all sorts of complex things going on, and so unfortunately, some of them are interwoven with other things. But I mean, they're huge threats to biodiversity. I wouldn't want to pull one out now and say it's just the climate change and things, but massive loss in our bats but that's complicated with a disease, a fungus disease is coming in.